Hi there, everyone. This is Chris Radford, and I'm sitting in London, but we have with us Henry,
Hi everyone, good evening.
and I think you're in a snowy Val d'Isere, aren't you, Henry?
Yep, a very snowy Val d'Isere,
And
and it couldn't have come any sooner or better timing this year of lack of snow.
so what we thought we'd do in this session. There's been quite a bit of news in the press and obviously around the resorts about the welcome dump of snow, which I think this time does qualify for the word dump.
Yeah.
And take a look at some implications. Now, you were telling me earlier on today, Henry, about a story around what's happening or something that was happening yesterday in Val d'Isere.
Yes, well,
you give everybody a bit of a briefing about what's going on. Yeah.
Yes, yesterday the ski area closed a lift called the Lesignan Express, is what it's called, because people were skiing in and around underneath the lift, setting off slab avalanches, some of them riding in avalanches and lucky to go in uninjured themselves, but the more important thing was that they were threatening people below, causing a real danger to the pistes below. And I couldn't believe that when I heard it on the radio last night, that things were kicking off so badly and that people were taking such big risks that they had to close the lift. Never heard of it before, so I saw the head ski patroller, Jean-Pierre Aguillon, this morning, and I asked him to confirm, and he very almost apologetically said that he had to because people were endangering others below them on the piste. And that is certainly something I've never seen in Val d'Isere before. But I have to say I agree with them that since then I've asked a number of people who've been skiing in the area, and they said that the behavior of people off piste in the last day, especially yesterday, it was just unbelievable. You know, it was clear yesterday you could go where you want. People taking huge risks, setting off tons of slabs all over the place, going for rides in them, and with seemingly no concern for themselves or other people's safety.
And I guess what's behind this is everybody's, we've been posting about the weak layer. Do you want to talk a little bit, Henry, about that before we have a quick look at this video from Bruce Tremper on where he explains what the weak layer is all about?
Yes, well, just about every year we have some sort of a weak layer in the Val d'Isere teen area in Savoie and Haute-Savoie. There's almost always a weak layer every year. It just depends how big it is. And this year we have a really, really massive weak layer that is comparable to what they get on a lot of years in the Rocky Mountains and in those cold climates, cold continental climates of the Rocky Mountains. So this year we have a really significantly big weak layer, and it hasn't really been too much of a problem until each time it snows. So each time it snows, it's unstable, and we've had avalanches and accidents and deaths that we've heard about in the news little by little over the last sort of month and a half or so. But it's really in this last couple of days, really, that this big snowstorm or series of snowstorms have put down enough snow for it to be really a real problem, and the accidents have gone up, and a lot of that is due in many ways to this weak layer and people pushing the boat out and going on to steep slopes and exposing themselves to dangerous situations below them.
What we plan to do in this call, everyone, is to have a quick look at this weak layer question, and then move on to have a look at what you can do, as opposed to what you can't do.
Yeah.
And what the outlook is, and try and end on a positive note about the opportunities. So what we thought we're going to do now is we're going to attempt to broadcast the video persistent slab avalanches. You can choose to watch the broadcast on here, or I've posted on the right hand side of your screen a link to the video on Vimeo. As I say, this is credit to the Utah Avalanche Center and the team that works with Bruce Tremper, and this is actually a guy called Trent who's got quite a productive stream of videos on avalanche awareness advice. But we picked this up today because it was recommended by Alan Duclos as a good explanation, and we wanted to have we're going to spend about, it takes about 6.5 minutes. We're going to watch this together, and then Henry's going to talk a little bit about how that translates into the situation in the French Alps today.
Yeah, and I'll just a quick summary before you put it on, Chris. While you're viewing it, it definitely is something that weak layer is something that resembles a lot what I've seen in my snow pits that I've done over the last few weeks, and what all of us are finding out there at the moment. I think the only big difference is that we don't have enough snow, or the depths of fresh snow above that weak layer to compare to the massive sizes that they're talking about in this video, but we're well on our way. All we need is another 50 centimeters or meter of snow, and we'll be pretty much right smack in the type of scenario that they're talking about with this persistent layer kind of situation, which is very typical to the Rocky Mountains in Utah, where Bruce Tremper and his team from the Utah Avalanche Forecasting Center are presenting from.
So here we go.
Weak layers is they produce very large avalanches, and so the avalanche.
So the broadcast will be clearer if you watch it yourself. But certainly it's good enough when you watch it on our through our.
Forest Service Avalanche Center. So we have what we call a persistent weak layer, and the reason they're called that is because they continue to produce avalanches for a long time after they're loaded up with snow. That's what makes them so dangerous. So statistically, about 1 out of 4 people that die in avalanches die from trauma, from hitting trees and rocks on the way down. And you can have the most expensive rescue gear in the world, and it's not going to do you a bit of good. All of our avalanche fatalities in Utah break on what we call faceted grains. In other words, these square-shaped grains with facets caused by temperature gradient metamorphism. Anytime the sky is clear, the snowpack gets weaker and weaker and becomes progressively more faceted. And so those are our most dangerous kind of weak layers. Once they get buried, they just can't support hardly any weight at all. They're like a pile of potato chips. And then when you're putting a brick on top of those pile of potato chips, they can't support the weight. They collapse under that weight, and then the whole snowpack just shatters like a pane of glass. The trouble with these deep, persistent weak layers is they produce very large avalanches. And so the avalanche danger is caused by both the probability of triggering an avalanche, but then just as much by the size of that avalanche. What's the consequences of triggering that avalanche? With very large avalanches, they're very difficult to survive because they take out the whole mountainside, they run long distances, they might strain you through trees, over cliffs. For
me, living here in Utah, using the Utah Avalanche Center is pretty much the #1 resource, apart from watching the snow accumulate all year. But yeah, the Utah Avalanche Center is the best way. You wake up in the morning, check out the forecast, check out the report, and kind of see what's going on around home.
I mean, for me personally, I really like the Avalanche rows, because then when I'm heading out there, I have that little picture in my brain, and I can think of, as I'm going up in elevation, which aspects, especially, I really want to avoid when I'm heading out there.
At the Avalanche Forecast Center, we've been reporting a considerable avalanche danger pretty much day after day after day for triggering persistent slab avalanches. Well, you can really see why. Here's our slab, and then right under here we have these very weak faceted grains. It's really angular. If you looked at it under a microscope, you would see that it's angular, it's striated, and it really just has no strength or structure to it. It doesn't bond well with its neighbor, and so when we stack heavier snow on top, it's actually very weak and collapsible, this faceted snow here. These grains were formed back in November when we went high and dry, kind of around the Thanksgiving period. They were formed through temperature gradient metamorphism, which is really just a big word for they changed over time with temperatures. And then we got snow on top of them, which buried and preserved them. There is a couple ways that these grains can go away. One is we can just keep stacking snow on top of these grains until we kind of remove this temperature gradient that I'm talking about. And what that does is it also, the sheer weight kind of pushes those grains together, allows them to what we call bond and center. So in order for us to trigger an avalanche, we need to be able to initiate or collapse that weak layer. And then we have to be able to propagate a crack through the snowpacker, through that weak layer, in order for the avalanche to move. And that's how we as backcountry riders trigger avalanches. We come down a slope, we find where we can affect that weak layer, we initiate it or collapse it, and then we propagate a crack through the snowpack.
The problem with this type of avalanche, Dragon, is that the snow will feel really strong underneath us. It'll lure us way out onto the slope. All we've got to do is find a weakness. That could be a steep little rocky breakover where the snowpack's a little bit shallower. Once we collapse the slope, we're going to be staring down the barrel of a very dangerous avalanche. The difference between a persistent slab and a deep slab is this is going to be a monster slide taking out the entire seasoned snowpack. As a backcountry rider, once I know I'm dealing with a persistent slab issue, then I know that the way that I manage it is with my terrain choices. I don't want to be on, and I definitely don't want to be connected with any steep terrain.
Remember that the journey is the destination. The goal is to come home alive and better friends than when you left.
So, Henry, what did you notice in there?
So, can you repeat the question?
What did you notice in there?
Well, what I noticed was a very strong correlation, huge similarity with what's going on in the northern French Alps, and I believe through a large part of the Alps at the moment, with that very weak, persistent layer. The only difference, and I mentioned that just before you put the video on, for those of you who just joined us, is that we don't have the quantity of snow, the massive quantities of snow on top of that weak layer that we saw in a couple of those video clips. But there's certainly enough out there to take people for a big ride, to kill people, injure them, and also injure people below you.
So for everybody watching, I've launched the Q&A app. If you haven't done so, if you press the Q&A button on the Google Plus page in the middle of the video, or if you're already there, you have the chance to ask questions, and we'll pick them up as we go through. So now you said, Henry, that you think we're not quite there with this level of weak layer, but I'm guessing that it's because of this that all these people going out underneath the Lausanne Express and in other parts of the Alps are finding themselves in trouble.
Well, what I said is was that we're there with the weak layer. We're just not there with the massive quantities of snow on top of it that they were talking about that rips out an entire slope on a mountain. What we saw underneath the Lesignan Express and in a number of other places, those of you who know Val d'Isère, are avalanches that are from small to medium to fairly large. The Table d'Orientation on the Bellevarde and Val d'Isère released artificially from explosives, but they're not these massive ones yet that they're talking about in Utah. But they're certainly dangerous, and even in some ways maybe even more dangerous, because it gives you a false sense of security that think, well, there's not that much snow up there, so we can head out. And that Lesignan Express has cliffs and things under it. Now, why I'm talking about the Lesignan Express, it's a lift in Val d'Isère. For those of you who just joined us, it's a lift in Val d'Isère that was closed yesterday due to really reckless skiing by people off-piste yesterday. The ski area closed it, and it's the first time I've ever seen in 25 seasons here in Val d'Isère, first time I've seen them close a lift because people were being reckless and endangering other people below them on the pistes, the open piste below them.
And it's not that they're not closing the lift because they're worried about people going out there and skiing off piste and causing damage to themselves. They're concerned about people causing danger to other people who are on the piste or other people on the lift. I think that's right, isn't it, Henry?
That's exactly right. In France, you're free to go where you want, and that's one of the reasons why I moved from North America. Well, the main reason I moved from North America and set up in France is that you're free to go where you want, and your safety is your own responsibility. But what's happened with the huge increase in popularity of off-piste skiing is there's a lot more people out there, and there is a lot of off-piste, like underneath the Lesignan Express, that endangers people below. So, after having spoken with the head ski patroller today, the head pisteur today, who really was reluctant to close it, but felt he needed to because the town has and the ski area has a responsibility to protect people on the open runs, and it wasn't the slopes above the untouched slopes that were endangering people. It wasn't the untouched slopes above that were endangering the people on the piste below. It was the accidental danger of avalanches with people skiing over those slabs and those slopes and releasing avalanches on top of people below. And the other real risk to me is that the other real risk is that if people continue to do that without thinking about the safety of other people below, then we're all in risk of losing our freedom on the off-piste in France, because this is a precedent that I hadn't seen before. Now we're back at Andreas's photo here, and I don't want people to think that this is where the people who are skiing so on steep slopes and endangering others. This is a photo here of that Andreas took today in the trees in the Fourne, which is a perfectly acceptable place to go, and there was a lot of very, very safe skiing that you could do in that area. Not that the trees are always safe, it's just that in certain areas they are safer because the snowpack is stabler. But once you have wide clearings and steep slopes, then actually trees can actually present more of a danger, as Bruce Tremper pointed out. So as long as you go into trees knowing that where there's lots of clumps of trees, and you stick to those and not onto the nice wide meadows above trees, then you're doing pretty well. And I think that was definitely a really good choice for really good skiers that Andreas had today, for example, from Alpine Experience.
So that another thing I wanted to cover, Henry, I wanted to ask you about was I was starting to get the impression this week that I've seen, if I think back to this season, that I've seen more reports of avalanche accidents and deaths than I'm used to seeing. And so I went and had a look today, and there have been 18 deaths in the French Alps already.
Mm-hmm.
There have been another 18 in Switzerland. for skiers, and from the numbers that I ran before, that sounds to me like we're tracking ahead of the normal rate, because, and my reading, if it's right, Henry, is just that there's people going out there either who don't know or should have known better, going into places where this weak layer is causing vulnerability, and of course those deaths, the accidental deaths are the tragic ones, and that's what's reported. But as we know, there are hundreds of other avalanches being triggered that have far less serious consequences.
Yes. So there's been hundreds of other avalanches being triggered that have far less consequences because we don't have. I mean, certainly we've got 80, 90 centimeters of snow in the northern French Alps, more in other parts of the Alps, and with a lot of wind. So there's pockets of snow that are releasing, and it's not taking out the whole mountainside that would normally injure people and kill a lot more people. It's just we still don't have the mass quantities of snow that was pointed out in that video, and I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have as many deaths. But the ironic thing is that 18 deaths in France, which is more than half the average being about 30 deaths a year in France, and we have abysmally low level of snow. We have it's record-breaking lack of snow we've had so far, which has led actually to this really weak layer. And the point being that this persistent weak layer and mega weak layer is there. It's persistent, and it's going to be trickier and more dangerous the more snow we get on top of it, and the more people take a risk. We all know that 90-95% of all avalanche deaths and injuries are caused by the victim or someone else in the victim's group. More and more from people above, but it's accidental triggering of avalanches that leads to accidents, and that's what's happening now. People are really pushing the boat out very, very far. Now that's fine. I don't want to criticize what people's risk taking is as long as they've informed themselves, but I get the impression that a lot of people who are getting caught out haven't really informed themselves. They're just going into areas that are not far from the lift, and look like nice skiing, and it is nice skiing. But because of this weak layer, it's very unpredictable and very unstable, and there's a high chance of triggering an avalanche. And having said that, the other thing that can get people, lure people into false sense of security is that even when it's really unstable, most slopes that are unstable will not avalanche. So you've got to go on clues by seeing a few, even if there's just a few recent avalanches that you can see on similar slopes. That's enough of an indication that it should tell you that steep slopes on similar aspects are dodgy. And you might get away with it once, you might get away with it 10 times, 50 times, but the more you do it, the more you're exposing yourself to a danger, and eventually something's going to happen to you.
So I thought, Henry, before we close the call, we should take a quick look at a couple of things now. We look at the bulletin and then get your recommendations and advice about where people could think about going this week.
Yeah.
And so on the bulletin, which here we go. So you and I were discussing before the call that the avalanche risk was 4 today, and they're talking about 4 going down to 3 and then back up to 4.
Yeah, they're not making it simple for us. Mother Nature isn't.
What do you make of this? Yeah.
Well, I think what they're saying is that is with the settling of the snow and at least in this very specific microclimate of the Haute-Tarentaise part of Savoy in the northern French Alps, as the snowfalls calm down, the chance of a natural avalanche happening is going to go down so much that they're going to put the risk level down to 3. They're saying that the risk level or danger rating level is going to go down to 3 between, was it 2 o'clock this morning and, from 8 o'clock tonight until 2 o'clock this morning. And from 2 o'clock this morning, they're saying that a new offensive of snow and wind is going to bring the danger rating up to a 4 again. So from 2 o'clock this morning until midday tomorrow, it's going to be a 4, but they're basing that almost exclusively on the chance of natural avalanche activity happening again. Again, natural avalanche activity is avalanches that happen by themselves and aren't triggered by people.
So if we do get a 3, this will be a high 3, won't it, Henry?
Yes, yeah. And when it goes down to a 3 again, that they're saying from midday, 3 o'clock tomorrow onwards, the danger rating is going to go down to a 3. But they're staying. They are saying, if you look closely and you know some French, they've said in this bulletin that there's been a very, very high number of accidental avalanches observed in the last 48 hours. That's what I was referring to, and this is not going to change. And in fact, it probably, as the danger rating goes up to 4, there's going to be more of a chance of triggering an avalanche. But as it goes down to a 3 again, the danger of triggering an avalanche is not really going to go down much. It sounds like a drop in danger rating is pretty significant from 4 to 3. It's one risk level change on a scale of 5. So you'd think, oh well, it's going to go down 20%, but I think it's not. Maybe like 3 or 4% chance of change of actually triggering an avalanche. And they're saying that the biggest danger is going to be on east-facing to southish-facing slopes where crown lines or fracture lines of 30 centimeters and more have been observed from starting at 1,500 to 1,800 meters of altitude. So that's pretty much all of the big resorts that are known for off-piste skiing all throughout the Alps. That danger of triggering an avalanche on that persistent weak layer is really continuing through the next few days, and because of the cold temperatures, that danger is going to continue throughout the whole week because the snowpack settles much slower when the temperatures are cold.
But as we discussed in a recent webinar, Henry, was that the difference between a 4 and a 3 isn't so much the risk of triggering an avalanche as the number of places in which you might trigger it and the size of the avalanche that might follow.
That is a very good point, and I think to summarize exactly what we're looking at is that there are and will continue to be quite a few places where you can trigger avalanches, and the size will continue to be pretty big enough to take you 100 meters or so over cliffs into a hole and bury you under several meters of snow, over rocks, into trees, all that kind of stuff. And
it was a big revelation for me to discover that the avalanche risk, as it goes down, it's not so much that you're less likely to trigger an avalanche, it's that there are fewer places and that it might be smaller.
Yes.
As you go down, and the reverse as you get bigger, which is not less likely, it's just, well, I suppose it is less likely because there are fewer places, but if you're in the wrong place, you're just as likely to do it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's...
So to come to the closing section of the call, Henry, then we just take a quick look at back at these pictures, which are from Wayne and Andreas, and they're kind of highlighting a few things about some thoughts on where to go.
Yeah.
Which what I noticed here, and then I get your comment, was that these guys are on, that looks like 15 to 20 degrees at most.
Well, that's because the photos also make the slope not look that steep. That's probably about 20-25 degrees. Whatever it is, it's a slope that is not threatened from above by a steep slope. That slope itself isn't going to release. So, yeah, call it 15 degrees, call it 25 degrees, maybe slightly more, but it's a slope that is not going to release. And to give people an idea too of what a 30-degree slope is. And a 30-degree slope is really that limit at which a slope will release or not under any conditions. 30 degrees is about the steepness of a black run. It's a very, very steep part of a red run to a black run, so you can have a lot of fun on steep-ish slopes below 30 degrees.
And and I noticed that it looks like there was either a natural or accidentally triggered release behind them. Not triggered by this group, I think, but just evidence of recent avalanche activity.
No, that slope was definitely not triggered by that group, and it wasn't even overhanging or threatening the slope that those people were on. It looks like it could have been maybe by that on that photo. So yeah, but there's recent avalanche activity on those steeper slopes, and that's why I believe that was Wayne's photos, I think, from a couple days ago. Whatever. That's why he's staying away from the steeper slopes.
And are there any other things that you're looking at, Henry, apart from looking for lower slope angles and not going underneath large steep slopes? Are there any other particular vulnerabilities that people should be looking out for?
Well, I mean, I'm going on and on about the risks and everything. I'm off-piste every day, and I'm looking for good snow all the time. And the paradox is that often the best snow is where the most danger is in terms of the aspect and the elevation of the mountain. And so that's another reason why I'm banging away about on this avoid the steep slopes. It's because the best snow is going to be on the sides of the mountain where the biggest risk is. You know, that girl talked about the rose, or you look at the clover on the avalanche forecast in France. And so that's one more reason to really stick with slopes and stay away from this. Stick with slopes that are below 30 degrees and try to stay away from slopes that are above you that are 30 degrees, because if you found some good snow, the chances are you're in an area of the mountain where it's unstable on the steeper slopes. Does that make sense, Chris? I think maybe if it didn't, get me to clarify.
I don't see any questions at the moment, Henry. So I think we've been talking for long enough. I hope everyone found that helpful. I'm sorry there isn't a magic answer of just go here and you'll be fine. Unfortunately, avalanche awareness isn't like that. And but thank you very much, Henry.
Well, let me just
but I'd like to summarise. Oh, we did have a couple of things, didn't we? To summarise with.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to end on a simple note, and I am off piste every day, and there is you can enjoy it out there and be safe, finding good snow. And if there is one formula, I call it the low-hanging fruit formula, and that is, and I sound like a broken record, but at least first thing in the morning, stick to the lower angle slopes. Maybe by trial and error, look for where the good snow is. The good snow is on the leeward side of the mountain, the side of the mountain that's protected from the wind, and that's often the side of the mountain that's been loaded up by the snow and the weight, and it's where it's more unstable. So that combination, low-hanging fruit, low-angle slopes on the leeward side of the mountain, is where I'm finding the best snow. And then I would advise people to do that. Otherwise, do as Andreas did today. He went into the woods and stayed where the trees are fairly tight together, and was very, very careful when it went into an open area on a steep slope.
That's great, Henry. Thank you very much. So, and thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll be back soon. We'll let you know when.
Thanks very much. Ride hard, ride safe. Have a good evening, and have a great season.